Hello, I'm Charlotte Nash, and for those of you that don't know me, I am a CDA Collaborative Doctoral Awards student with the University of Kent and the British Museum. And I'm really terrified, but also happy to be speaking to some of my peers at the British Museum about my PhD studies and how they're going and what they're all about. The working title of my PhD is Exploring Economy, Society and Culture Through Glass Bangles, subtitle being Origins, Circulation and Cultural Impact in the Western Indian Ocean. And it's all about basically Islamic glass bangles throughout the Middle East from, I'm looking at the 13th to 18th century CE, and what we can learn about them. So there've been a few studies before, but what I'm attempting is sort of a broader and also more inclusive study that perhaps creates more of a master typology. I'm sort of creating a typology that can be, a methodology that can be applied for future studies as well. So my focus is going to be on the Siraf collection, which is at the British Museum. And my supervisor at Kent University is Professor Ellen Swift. My primary supervisor at the British Museum is Dr. Andrew Meek in the science department, because there is a very strong scientific element to this, which I will talk about a bit later. And my secondary supervisor is Dr. Sinjan Simpson of the Middle East department, whose Siraf collection I'm looking at primarily. So that's a bit about the background. And as you can see, these are some examples of my lovely bangles that I've been looking at. So the original research aims and objectives were such to analyze and record the collection or collections. And the idea is really to look at the Siraf collection, but contextualize it against others and the wider corpus of bangles, and then to create a chronological and regional typology to better organize and understand the objects, but also to be used as a catalogue for future studies, and help to visualize the distribution and spread of these bangles through that, then to review that against other historically known changes, whether that be cultural, economic, political, whatnot. And the hope is to better understand the physical objects and where they're being produced and disseminated. And this is also where the scientific analysis is really important, because I'm trying to look at the chemical signatures of the glasses to work out the primary production locations. And then once all that's done, to then better understand cultural changes and things such as personal identity and potentially the values, because of course, unlike many other more practical objects, these are objects of personal adornment, they're accessories. And so they can hold a much stronger personal or cultural meaning to them as well. So lots of exciting opportunities, I think. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is understand the known bangle collections that have been published in the past and where they sort of grew. And you can see from this map that certainly those from the period I'm looking at primarily fall into sort of 5 core regions. And interestingly, this is partially because of these are the regions of archaeological interest at the time, but also they do quite strongly reflect the visual differences in a lot of the bangles. So you can visually tell the difference already between those from Egypt and neighboring Levantine region. The Levant, of course, as with everything in archaeology, is heavily overrepresented because it was heavily excavated and continues to be a region of a lot of activity. But also it is fair to say that Egypt and the Eastern Mediterranean are very prominent pre-Islamic regions for glass manufacturing anyway. And there are more studies actually that have been done on Levantine regions, but I couldn't fit them on the map. Whereas those along the Indian Ocean trade network are far less studied actually than those around the Red Sea or the Eastern Mediterranean basin. So my focus is going to be on the Gulf region, and specifically Siraf within the Gulf region. I hope to better define that region within the context of the wider Eastern Mediterranean region. And some exciting studies should, I hope, be published prior to my PhD completing. And I'm now in my second year, believe it or not. But they will tell me a bit more about Indian glass bangles, I hope. So, because there are ongoing studies on those. So that's exciting as well. So past studies. So the best ones that have really made an attempt at a typology in the past have really been Shindu, Spear, Boulogne, and Duckworth. But they have used a similar typological approach and archaeological technique here, but they are not the same. So they're all slightly different. They don't all classify type A's as plain, for example. The subtypes really differ. There's not a bigger picture methodological approach to this at the moment. So one of the challenges for me was to look at all these studies and to attempt to create something that would complement what was already done and take the best parts of that without completely starting from scratch, but also integrate and be able to translate the existing studies into it so that there could be some kind of master catalogue. So yeah, that's been quite a big challenge really, but I think I'm there now with that. So this is kind of how the typological framework will eventually be look. And as you can see, this is just type A, and type A is plain or undecorated bangles. And as you can see, there are multiple subtypes that I have identified. Usually this is all lumped into one group. So I think it's important to stress that because there is this more granular aspect to my study, I think it will be more successful in identifying regional differentiation, because I think you will find plain glass bangles everywhere, but there are differences visually that can identify where they have been produced in different workshops. So that's something that I've been doing. You can see there's a lot of subcategories, but it's not indefinite amount of subcategories. It's a manageable amount. And you can see from my collection, then you can see there's visual examples there of core types that I've picked, and then percentage and numbers. So this is kind of the end result in that I hope to, of course, be putting in the period soon, and also provenance. So synchronizing and visualizing the data. So as I mentioned, it's really important. If you just look at it in pie charts and it's like core categories, A's, B's, C's, up to F actually, although I only have G in the Siraf collection, you see that you're getting a very different picture to though if you look at a starburst chart that shows you all these subcategories as well. And then you actually really get a feel for what the core types are at a particular site and how that may be similar or differ to others. So revisualizing the data in this more detailed approach and taking sort of big data and pushing it down into a visual aid like this is really helpful, and is partly how I'm going to identify patterns, I hope, across my data. And then this is really the bones of it. This is behind the scenes, how I went about creating the coding system that I have. And as you can see, there are multiple subtypes, some of which are not represented in my current Siraf collection, but I know they do either exist or could exist in others. And then this is the recording data sheet that I'm using for the CIRAF collection to look at things such as where they have been found, the find spots and things. So this is like the master behind the scenes for each object, which then will have a chemical coding system, the color coding system, and my period. And then I will, with the smart table, be able to alter what I want to look at to start seeing, again, patterns and potential connections between, I hope, types and periods and places and colors and that kind of thing. So that's the idea. And then talking about the scientific elements of this, excuse the pun. So we've already started SEM analysis and we've already started to see that there are different regional productions for the glasses. So you see here, these are all twisted varieties. So these are all type 2, but they are from different regions. So we've got Mesopotamian glass, Eastern Mediterranean glass, and Central Asian glass, which is really interesting, especially for this period, if anyone knows about glass. So I'm also creating a chemical coding system for scientists to be able to easily look at my code and know what the core chemical signatures are and if they have a particularly high, low, or medium aspect to them. So I'm sort of combining two already used approaches into one thing that I think works well, I hope. So that's something else I am doing. And it's all to create a master reference catalogue. So some of my preliminary results have been really exciting. As I said, not only have I seen correlation between subtypes and chemical signatures, which has not been achieved before, but there's also some really interesting groupings here. We have analysed 60 fragments so far. They have now been sent off for LA ICP-MS analysis, or laser ablation analysis for short, which will give us even more detail, and hopefully we'll be able to see within the regions more specific groupings of glass and where they're being produced, to pinpoint them a bit better. And yes, some very interesting findings. For one, it has long been presumed that this would be impossible because Islamic glass was primarily thought to have been recycled, especially the dark bangles are thought to have been of recycled glass, some of which was probably Roman glass, and that they're black in appearance because they are multiple colours that have just been melted down. This study has so far proven that's not the case at all. In fact, it's a very precise and rather complex recipe that's being used to produce a specific colour black, which is, again, very interesting, especially because blacks and browns, being the most prominent colour in the collection, are also reflective of important colour within Islamic tradition. So that's really fascinating. And so I only have in my collection that I have analysed plant ash glass, which is the most, well, it is the one that is produced in the Middle East, the type. You don't get natron glasses in the Middle East in this period after the Roman period unless they're recycled. And the mineral glass that you tend to get is imported from India. I'm not seeing that in my collection here. Swan did a very small analysis from a collection from CIRAF at the Corning Museum, and one of hers was from South Asia. So yeah, I did expect to find more, but I didn't find any. Also was really interesting to see is that when I did my visual analysis and I looked at the different manufacturing techniques, I identified 3 here as being essentially modern, which is around 19th century, and they have been picked up as such as well chemically from their signatures as modern, having modern elements in them. So So anyway, this is just a bit more of the chemical analysis really that how far we've got with it so far with planes and uh, dark types that are twisted. Something else that I will be doing, and I have now ordered this, is a Munsell color tree, color coding tree, which is 3-dimensional. And this is because there is, of course, the Munsell soil color chart that helps you identify the color of soils and also pottery. But there's nothing for other kind of objects. And for glass, I just thought this is really useful, because to understand a color, you need full 3D understanding of a hue, the chroma, the value. And also, I will be using Corning Museum's opacity scale as well to create a coding system, so that we can actually see if there are matches of color, and also across different collections, and when there are no visual aids. And also color is very objective in that respect, so it's good to have a coding system, because blue could mean so many things. And I think that this will definitely show patterns as well between types and regions and periods. And you can kind of see here I've done a sort of very basic color wheel based on Spear's 3 collections from the same region that had different periods, to sort of see how the color palettes have changed. So I think that has got a lot of potential, because color is very emotive and has a different kind of cultural value and meaning attached to it. And I think it's something that a few people have suggested would be important to do, but no one has really done yet. So again, creating a system that can be used and added to in the future is quite important with my PhD. Something else that's really interesting is I'm looking at the circumference, and again, this is all to do with what you can interpret at the end, and looking at who the wearers might be based on the circumference. And a lot of speculation has been that these are part of female adornment items, female identity, and that is being corroborated now by the circumference of these objects, which are on average 5 to 7 inches, which is very small. So women and children, I think. And this does fit with evidence such as David Whitehouse himself mentioned when he was excavating, that they were very similar to those that village women and children still wore. And other examples where people have historically mentioned them to be something that women wore in the Middle East. And there's definitely a connection actually with the Islamic expansion. And I think they did actually reach India and become part of Indian cultural identity through Muslim families migrating. So that's another really interesting aspect to do with identity and culture that I hope to find out through the archaeological data. And then experimental archaeology. So I've actually realized there's actually about 4 different techniques, maybe 5 different techniques of manufacturing, and they do relate generally to different periods. And there are still a couple of ethnographic examples of these being made, as you can see by those pictures. I can't talk in any length, but I do now have some solid plans to go with Joel Roland and do some experimental archaeology, if COVID allows this year, if not next. That I will talk about in the future. Looking at other collections is going to be the main thing that I'm going to have to do next, because once I've done everything I can do on the Siraf collection, I need to better contextualize it. And some of the pre-existing studies aren't always detailed enough to allow me to do so. Originally, there was plans for me to go to the UAE last year and look at some comparative collections myself. COVID has steamrolled that idea, but I'm now in talks with various other experts who've already done analysis or have collections that I may be able to analyze. and I hope to do that this year. And so all is not lost. I'm exploring alternative avenues, and I will not say much about this now because we'll see where I go with it, and I hope to give you an exciting update on my findings. That's it. I think I've run slightly over time, so I'd just like to thank you to everybody, and if there's any questions, please ask.